Christmas Eve. Freezing wind slicing through the barn like a knife through bone. I was flat on my back under my old F-150, the same way I've done every Christmas for 40 years. Oil change, filters, routine. Then my hand brushed something smooth. Plastic. Heavy. Not a bolt. Not a part. A GPS tracker. For a second I thought it was a mistake. Then I remembered, only two people ever touch this truck. My wife Linda or my son Evan. The smell of motor oil mixed with cold sweat. The wedding ring on my hand scraped the steel frame loud in the silence. And right then it hit me. This wasn't maintenance. This was surveillance. One of them was lying. One of them was watching me. If you think you'd have known what to do, you might want to subscribe, because this story gets darker from here. The house smelled like beef and onions, the kind of smell that used to mean home. Linda stood at the stove, stirring slow, eyes on the pot, not on me. I set my gloves on the counter. She didn't ask about the truck, didn't ask about the cold, kept stirring, like stopping might break something. The landline rang, the old wall phone with the curly cord. She flinched, lifted it fast, pressed it tight, walked down the hall. Bedroom door clicked. Her voice went thin behind wood, too quick, like she was reading answers she'd practiced. Steam rose off the stew and went nowhere. The smell turned weak. I wiped my hands on a towel, pulled my cell, and called my boy. Evan? Yeah, Dad. You still headed north on Boxing Day? Saskatoon by Thursday. I've got a package for you. Small. Stays in the cab. Don't ask. He let a breath out I could hear. Okay. The bedroom door opened. Linda came back with that soft, practiced smile. Dinner's ready, she said without looking at me. She set bowls like a waitress, careful not to touch my hand. I slid the phone away, sat, watched her ladle the stew like she was feeding a stranger. The spoon shook once, then steadied. Let's eat, I said. Sure, she answered. I lifted my fork and told myself one thing. Tonight I keep quiet, and I watch. Tomorrow, the tracker leaves this house. Let's see what breaks first. The silence or the lies. She sat across from me with red around her eyes and a tight line where a mouth should be. We ate like we were borrowing the table from somebody else. Forks, plates, a clock in another room. The stew tasted like hot water. Twice her cell buzzed on the counter. Twice she ignored it, but her eyes kept drifting, like the phone had its own gravity. You okay? I asked. I'm fine, she said, the kind of fine that means stop asking. I tried weather, roads, church charity. Every answer came back hollow, like talking into a grain bin and hearing your voice die on steel. She stood, leaned in, and kissed the top of my head. Habit, not touch, no weight. My wedding ring tapped the plate. The sound was small and mean. She rinsed a clean spoon just to be busy. The sauce in my mouth went metallic, like the taste when you bite your tongue and don't bleed. Out the window, the yard light swung in the wind and threw bars of shadow across the table. I used to think that light kept us safe. Tonight it just made everything look colder. I reached for my glass. Evan's running a load north, I said, casual as I could. Canada. Her spoon stopped midair. Only a second. But I saw it. She set it down. Nice, she said, too light. The landline rang again, sharp, bright, urgent. She jumped. I didn't move. Dawn's coming, I thought. The tracker's leaving with it, and if she takes that call, I'll know who's waiting on the other end. Boxing Day. The truck stop sat quiet like a held breath. Diesel hung thin in the cold, and the sun was the color of worn nickel. Evan's rig idled by the pumps, chrome dull with frost. He handed me a paper cup. Coffee tasted like burned hope. I pulled the bundle from my coat pocket, shop rag around a small, heavy secret, and set it in his palm. He didn't look down, just weighed it once like a man who understands trust by feel. Same route? I asked. Omaha, Sioux Falls, Portal Crossing, Saskatoon by Thursday. Keep it in the cab. Forget it's there. He nodded. A son's nod. Not the boy who left, the man who came back when it counted. We didn't say anything about Linda We didn't say anything about lies. We talked chains, tires, black ice, the things men talk about when the real thing is too close to name. "Call me when you're north of the line," I said. He squeezed my shoulder, climbed into the cab, and pulled out slow, the rig's lights smearing in the low light. I watched the trailer disappear into the flat gray, heard the engine fade until it was only wind again. I stayed there a minute longer, letting the cold take my face. The rag in my pocket felt suddenly light. My breath came white and steady. By night, the tracker would be in another country. By night, whoever planted it would start to sweat. Let's see who makes the first mistake. House quiet, TV whispering to nobody. Linda in the kitchen, rinsing a clean glass. I walked down the hall and lifted the bedroom extension with 2 fingers, held my breath, and waited. The landline rang once in the kitchen. She answered on the first beat. A man's voice, tight and hot. "Why is the tracker pinging in Saskatoon?" Her voice dropped to a whisper I hadn't heard in years. He didn't say anything. He's not smart enough to... Silence on the line, then the word that split me open. Baby. It hit like a wrench to the ribs. He kept going. "If he knows, we move it up. Spring was the plan, but we can't wait. Do you hear me?" "I've got it under control," she said, quick, practiced, like repeating steps she'd rehearsed in a mirror. "He takes everything at face value." I stared at the dark window and saw my reflection. Older, harder, still standing. The blood in my ears sounded like a train. I pressed the phone tighter, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. "Just keep him calm," the man said. "Old men spook easy. We're almost there." Almost there. 2 words that told me everything I needed to know. They hung up. I set the receiver down without a click, palms slick with sweat. The house was the same house, but the air felt different, used up, fouled. I walked back to the chair and sat like nothing had moved. Only one thought stayed sharp enough to hold. In the morning, I go to the bank. And I stop being polite. First County Bank smelled like paper and lemon polish. A young teller smiled like I was her granddad. I asked for the loan files. She brought out a folder thick enough to choke a shredder. November refinance, new terms, balloon payment, penalties tucked in the weeds, and a signature that said my name without my hand. I know my own R. I know how my Y drops and where it doesn't. This wasn't me. The manager came in with a careful face and a cheaper tie. He said a lot of things that sounded like help and landed like stone. "If you want to dispute, Mr. Bennett, we'll need the original deed." He slid the word original across the desk like it weighed a ton. "County clerk can issue certified proof." "When?" He cleared his throat. "County offices are closed. Ice took out the road to the seat. Maybe March. Maybe sooner if we're lucky." I looked at the clock on the wall and felt the room get small. Small town, big locks. They had paper. They had a fake version of me, black ink and confidence. I had a farm, a name, an air that suddenly felt hard to swallow. The teller, Sharon, her tag said, wouldn't meet my eyes. She knew enough to be scared, not enough to help. I thanked no one, gathered the copies, and walked out into a wind that cut like wire. If the front door was barred, I'd find a side door. I got in my truck, dialed a number I trust, and said, "Bear, I need you." That evening, after the bank visit, Tom Bear Jenkins shows up 20 minutes later, denim coat, jaw like an anvil, and a canvas duffel that clinks when it hits my kitchen table. He looks at me once, takes in everything, and unzips the bag. Out comes a black square the size of a wallet. Another, smaller, no bigger than a matchbox. A roll of fresh lithium cells. A bundle of cords and a thumb drive with more attitude than most men. "War taught me one thing," he says, voice like gravel. "Information keeps you breathing." We work in silence. One mic under the truck's dash, tucked into factory shadows. One behind the living room curtain rod, pointed at the couch where the truth never sits. One in the kitchen, inside the top cabinet Linda never touches unless company comes. Bear's hands are steady. Mine stop shaking somewhere around the second screw. He sets my old laptop on the counter, boots a dashboard I don't understand, makes it simple. When it hears voices, it records. When it records, it uploads here. Password's the name of your first dog. He grins. And no, Linda doesn't know it. I pour coffee that tastes like the day I quit sugar. We stand there and drink it like men at a funeral. Brief, black, necessary. From here on, Bear says, capping the last unit, you don't guess, you listen. The house is quiet. The mics are not. Somewhere in these walls, the story is already talking. I sit down, open the laptop, and wait for the first lie to breathe. I opened the laptop. The dashboard Bear setup glowed dull blue, a list of files like cold teeth. I clicked the first one. Static. Then Linda's voice, small and sharp, like a knife kept clean. 2.4 million when the developer closes, Mexico after, and if it goes sideways, the 500 grand policy covers it. A man answered, steady, younger. As soon as he's gone. Gone. The words sat in my chest and wouldn't move. I stared at the kitchen wall like I could push through it and come out somewhere I still trusted my life. Chairs, clock, the good plates we never use. Ordinary things, standing there like witnesses too scared to speak. Linda laughed then, soft, like a door clicking shut. He takes everything at face value. He won't see it. The blood left my hands. My forearms felt like rebar in winter. I dragged the cursor and saved the file. Evidence Lawyer 01. Typed it slow so I wouldn't miss. Sat there while the fan in the laptop hummed like a far-off engine and the house pretended to be asleep. They were going to sell my land, take my name off my own life, and if I made it hard, they had a price on my corpse to make it easy. I closed the screen and listened to the empty rooms breathe. Sunday was coming. Linda would want church, public eyes, public story. Let's see what kind of God she asks to forgive her. 2 days later, Sunday morning. The church smelled like coffee and old hymnals. Cedar Hollow shows up in their good coats when it's cold. I took our usual pew, third from the back. Reverend Stevens preached on trust, marriage, promises, how love keeps no record of wrongs. Linda timed her tears like a clockmaker. People watched me watching her. After the closing prayer, he caught my elbow. Frank, a word? We stepped into his office. Books, a framed fishing photo. He shut the door like he was keeping a draft out. Linda's worried, he said, gentle as a bandage. She thinks you've been forgetting things. Papers, conversations. Maybe get checked, rule out, early signs. I tasted copper and nothing else. I know what I signed, I said. He nodded, like sorry and sure can live in the same face. Just for your own peace of mind. We walked back into the fellowship hall. Trays of cookies, the smell of lemon cleaner. Clara from the choir said, a little too loud, "How are you feeling, Frank?" Jim from the hardware store clapped my shoulder and looked at me the way folks look at a stray dog near the highway. Linda told our neighbor I'd had a rough week. Sympathy spread faster than truth. I stood there smiling like a man who'd misplaced his name. The room buzzed. The story was already moving without me. By the time the amen died, my town had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. Out on Maine, folks ask the kind of question that isn't a question. You doing okay, Frank? The smile comes first, the pity lands second. I said I was fine and kept moving. At the diner, the bell rang, boots scraped tile, and talk slid off plates when I walked in. The waitress set a mug that shook a little in her hand. Coffee hissed against the rim like it didn't want to be here either. I sipped and tasted metal, heard my name threaded into whispers, soft, careful, like I might break if they said it louder. Linda's story had legs and good shoes, dementia, forgetful, misplacing papers. Happens to men my age. Happens all the time. I left the cup half full and stepped into wind that scraped my face clean. The old silo loomed gray at the edge of town, taller than the church steeple, older than most marriages here. I walked to it like a man going back to a promise. The iron steps sang a thin, cold note when the wind pushed through. Did I sign something and forget? Did I miss a conversation? It's a mean thing, how doubt can sound like your own voice. I stood with my hand on the concrete, cheek to the chill, listening for anything steady. The town had decided what I was. I needed to decide what I knew. I turned toward the bins. If I couldn't trust a room full of people, I'd trust steel and ink. I walked the line of grain bins like I used to at dawn, boots on packed snow, palm on ribbed metal. The cold bit, but the steel didn't lie. My breath smoked and drifted away. The bins hummed the way they do when the wind tests them, old bones holding the weight they were built for. Land doesn't betray you, my father used to say. He'd spit, wipe his hands, and say it again when he caught me looking. People do, not dirt. I let the words settle where doubt had been. Back at the truck, I spread the bank copy across the tailgate, smoothed it with my fist. November refinance. Terms like traps. My name drawn by a stranger in a hurry. I traced the R. Mine hooks a hair to the right before it stands up straight. This one loops like it's showing off. The Y in Bennett. My Y drops, sure, but not to the basement. This one goes all the way through the floor. I stood there with my gloves off till my fingertips burned. Let the cold bite me honest. The wind pushed, the bins answered, and something sharp inside me stood up. They forged me in ink and tried to make it law. They turned my name into a handle to carry my life away. No more. I folded the paper, slid it into my coat, and felt the decision click into place like a bolt into a rifle. I wasn't going to wait for the county thaw. I was going to make my own weather. Phone rang while I was sitting with the forged paper warming in my pocket. Frank, it's Mary Harris. Grace's sister. That voice had the same steady plainness Grace carried around like a good coat. I should have called sooner, she said. Grace left a lockbox for you, in case you ever married the wrong person. I let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a break. She say that? She did, and I promised. I'm driving down Wednesday, 11 sharp. Keep the coffee hot. I wrote it on the pad by the phone. Grace's box, Evil Key. I underlined it until the pen cut the paper. The house felt a degree warmer just seeing the words. Out the window, the yard looked the same. Ice at the fence posts, a crow picking at nothing. But I could breathe deeper. Thank you, Mary. She loved you, Mary said, simple as a fact. Loved this land more than any bank ever will. We hung up. I stood there with my hand on the receiver like it could still pass heat. Lockbox. Grace's insurance against my loneliness. Proof that the past had been paying attention while I wasn't. Wednesday. A day with a spine. I went to the fridge, crossed off dates with a black marker. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Left Wednesday whole. The phone sat quiet again, but the room wasn't. It hummed with what was coming. If the town wanted stories, I'd bring documents. If they wanted pity, I'd bring steel. 3 sleeps, and the dead would speak for me. Bear came back after dark with a thermos, and that look he gets when a job has edges. Got your carrier login? He asked. I handed him the bill I've been paying since Linda said she'd handle the online stuff. We sat shoulder to shoulder at the kitchen table. The laptop threw cold light on our hands. He walked me through it slow. Account, usage, call history. One number stacked like corn in a bin. 47 calls between December 20th and mid-January. Morning, noon, midnight. 3 minutes. 45. All the same. Mark Lyle, Bear said, tapping the screen. Grand Island address. He's been named in a wire fraud mess. Dodged it, but the stink sticks. The printer coughed to life. Pages slid out one by one, warm and ugly. Each sheet felt like a clean slice. Date, time, duration. Proof that doesn't care what anyone thinks of your mind. I laid them in order, straightened the edges with my palm, and wrote on the cover, Evidence, 02. The pen dug a groove, my name on the bill. Her name on the shame, his number like a nail through both. Print it twice, Bear said. One for the safe, one for the swing. I fed the tray and watched the machine do what people in my town wouldn't, keep score. When the last page cooled, the kitchen smelled like hot plastic and old coffee. Bear poured, I drank, and the quiet settled heavy. They could say I forgot. They could say I was confused. But numbers don't lie, and ink doesn't age. Mary pulled in at 11 on the dot, tires crackling on the frozen gravel. She hugged me like family that's done more work than talk, then set the metal box on the kitchen table. The paint was nicked, corners bright with old scrapes. It smelled like pennies in winter. I spun the dial the way you do when you don't want to rush a thing that matters. Left, right, left. Then a clean, small click. The lid came up on a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Paper browned at the edges. A photograph of my father in a hat too big for his ears, one hand on a grain bin we poured when I was a boy. Another of me and Grace on the courthouse steps, her smile the only light I remember from that October. Underneath, the deed, 1949, ink steady as the ground it claimed. His name. Then the transfer to mine. Not a copy, not a story. The spine of our life. My hands shook, but not from doubt. Mary watched me read and didn't fill the air with words. Some things don't need help standing up. We set the papers in order. I slid the deed into a clear sleeve like a man tucking in a child. Mary poured coffee and said, "Grace always prepared the ground." I nodded. The house felt anchored again. The rattling in my chest settled. I looked at the clock. "Saturday," I said. 9 a.m. "Good," Mary said. "Make it loud." That night it was me, Evan, and Bear at the table. Coffee rings like crop circles. The lockbox open like a heart we finally confessed to. We laid out the plan the way farmers lay out spring. Straight rows, no guesswork. 3 USB drives, same cuts, labeled clean. One goes in my coat, one in Evan's cab, one in the barn safe under the truck titles. Cloud backup Bear set to auto. If anything goes wrong, files fly without asking. The deed, certified copies in triplicate, originals in a sealed sleeve, duplicates for the sheriff, the bank, and Reverend Stevens if it comes to that. "Dale can get you the co-op loudspeakers?" Bear asked. "He owes me 3 favors," I said. "He can spare a wire." Evan unfolded a map like we were planning a harvest. Parking along Main, ladder access on the north face of the silo, power checked at dawn. He'd print the call logs large enough for the back row to read. Bear would run the sound. I'd climb. No dramatics. Just truth on a pole so everyone could hear it. We picked Saturday, 9 a.m., early enough to catch folks before chores, late enough for word to spread. I wrote it on the calendar in black, then circled it once, hard. The pen dug into paper and stopped there like a stake. "Any questions?" I said. Evan shook his head. Bear closed the duffel with a zip that sounded final. "Then we wait," I said, looking at the deed. "And we keep breathing till the clock rings." Evening settled on the house like frost. Linda dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned on the counter like it was casual. "What was that package you sent with Evan? Canada?" Her tone was light, eyes not. "Parts for a buddy's truck," I said. Flat. Barely enough to count as an answer. She smiled the soft kind that never reaches the eyes. "You're kind." I poured coffee I didn't want and watched steam disappear. Later, when the house was quiet enough to hear baseboards tick, I opened the laptop. The kitchen mic had caught her voice clear as glass. "Mark, we need to move the timeline," she said, breath fast, lids of cabinets thudding as if noise could hide a lie. "He gave something to Evan. He said Canada." His voice came back tight. "Then we move now. No waiting on spring. Keep him calm." She said, "He believes what you put in front of him. He always has." A laugh she'd never used on me slid between her teeth. I saved it. Evidence 03. Typed slow, hand steady. The room felt colder, but my head didn't. If they were nervous, the tracker was doing its job. If they were rushing, they'd make mistakes. I shut the lid and stared at the kitchen window. All I saw was my face and the yard light behind it, swinging, cutting my reflection into pieces. I picked up the phone, dialed a number that still meant something, and said, "Reverend, you up for a drive?" "Tonight?" he asked. "Tonight," I said. "Bring your good ears." We met in the barn, where the cold keeps a man honest. The smell of oil and dry hay. Tools hung on pegboard like prayers for machines. The flag Grace insisted we keep, faded, frayed, watched from the crossbeam. I poured 2 coffees from the thermos and told him everything. The tracker under my truck, the calls, the forged refinance, the lockbox with my father's ink and Grace's mercy. Bear's mics, Mexico, the insurance money they said out loud like it wasn't about my pulse. Reverend Stevens didn't interrupt. He held the cup in both hands, warming them, eyes on the floor like he was reading something there only he could see. When I finished, his voice came slow. Justice or vengeance, Frank? I looked at that flag and thought about the courthouse photo of me and Grace, young enough to think weather only comes from the sky. Justice, I said. Then file it. Sheriff, county, do it right. I will, I said. But this town runs on stories. They've heard one about me losing my mind. They won't unhear it in an office. They need to hear it together, clean, loud. He nodded once, pain in it. Public truth cuts. Be sure you want the blood that follows. I want my name back, I said, and my land. He stood, put on his hat. Friday, you get the stamp. Saturday, I'll be there. The barn settled around us. Something inside me did the same. We shook hands in the cold, two men who still believed in words when they're spoken plain. When he left, the night felt lighter. The plan finally had a spine, and so did I. By Friday, the roads quit pretending to be glass. Ruts turned to mud, then to something a truck could trust. I drove to the county seat with the deed in a sleeve on the passenger seat like a passenger who'd been quiet too long. The clerk's office smelled like paper, floor wax, and a heater that's always 10 minutes behind the weather. I handed the deed across the counter. The woman, gray hair, sensible sweater, read it top to bottom. She checked a ledger older than both of us, then the screen. Original, she said, like a verdict. The stamp came down clean. Certified. The sound was small and final, like a lid closing on a coffin that needed closing. She pulled up the refinance and frowned. Signature doesn't match our file, she said, tilting the page so we both could see. You'll want to file a fraud claim. I will, I said, and meant it. She made copies with practiced hands, slid them to me, eyes soft but not sorry. This wasn't pity. This was process doing what process is supposed to do. Outside, the wind cut the courthouse steps, but I didn't feel it. I stood there a moment, the folder under my arm, breathing like a man who finally found the air. For months, I'd been the rumor. Now, I had the record. Paper that could stand up in a room where voices bend. I drove home slow, past fields sleeping under crusted snow, and said it out loud in the cab. Tomorrow. I woke before the alarm. Dark, heavy quiet, the kind that makes a house sound guilty. Coffee went on. I spread the kitchen table with what mattered. Deed originals sealed, certified copies in 3 stacks, call logs printed twice, phone records labeled in thick black letters, USB drives 1 through 3, each with the same truth inside. The lockbox sat open like a chest cavity. I checked it, then checked it again. Bear came at first light, boots leaving thaw prints on the porch. He took the barn key without talk. I'll test the power, he said. We'll run it off the co-op line if we have to. Dale called from the pickup lot. He had the loudspeakers, he had the members. Word had moved the way word does here, on short roads with long memories. Evan rolled out maps and taped them to the counter. Ladder access, crowd space, truck parking, where the sheriff would stand when he had to. He held up the poster boards, call logs big enough for the folks by the feed store to read from the back row. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. I slipped the handheld mic into my coat's inside pocket, the way a man might slip a letter he can't afford to lose. Linda slept hard, door cracked the width of a lie. I tucked my wedding ring under the lockbox foam and closed it soft. Outside, morning peeled up from the fields, thin and gray. I finished my coffee, felt it hold in my chest, and stood. 9 o'clock wasn't far anymore. By 10 to 9, Main Street looked like a parade that forgot the music. Trucks nosed along the curb, heaters ticking, windows fogged from breath. I stepped out and felt the east wind carry mud and thaw, the smell of fields waking up ugly. Linda pulled in with a face that could pass for a mask. Not mad, not sad, just set. She stood near the back like an onlooker at somebody else's fire. 50 feet away, Mark Lyle kept to the shade, hands in the pockets of a coat that cost more than a decent used tractor. Not touching. Close enough for a photograph. Reverend Stevens nodded once. Sharon from the bank stood small but steady, a folder hugged tight. David Rourke looked like a man counting mistakes in real time. Sheriff Holloway leaned on his cruiser the way a man leans on a rule he hopes will hold. Folks from the co-op, the diner, the VFW, all the faces that make up a town when it wants to see something happen. Bear checked the cable at the base of the silo, then glanced up, 2 fingers raised. Good. Evan unrolled the last poster board and taped it to the side of a grain cart. The call log in numbers too big to ignore. The yard light over the hardware store clicked off as the sky found its color. I took the ladder with cold hands and a clear head. Rungs rang under my boots. Steel, breath, wind. Every step felt like a year I'd earned. I didn't look down. I already knew who was there. I needed them to hear who I was. 20 feet, wind under my coat. 30, hands numb through the gloves. 40, the square below went soft, the way a map blurs when your eyes water in cold. 50, my heart kept time with my boots. 60, a hawk cut the gray and didn't care. 70, I could see the county line in my head where the road straightens. 80 feet, the platform like a postage stamp, just big enough for truth and a pair of boots to stand on. I swung over the rail, took the control box in both hands, and slid in USB 1. The plastic seated with a click I felt through my bones. I thumbed the switch. The rack lights blinked alive. The loudspeaker popped once, mean, sharp, then grabbed hold. Cedar Hollow, I said into the mic, voice low, steady. My name is... A scream of feedback knifed the air and died. Then nothing. No hum, no buzz, no wind through the cone, just the kind of quiet that makes people look at each other to see if they imagined it the same way. I tapped the mic. The box showed power, but the speaker stayed dead. Below, a ripple ran through the crowd. Sheriff shaded his eyes. David lifted a hand like he could catch the sound and put it back. Linda didn't move. Mark took 1 step sideways toward the service panel. I took the cord, reseated it, counted to 3, and threw the switch again. Pop. Breath. Silence. Fine, I thought. If someone wanted quiet, they'd picked the wrong man. I reached into my coat for USB 2, and the wind hit the platform like a shove. From the platform I could see everything that mattered, and one thing that didn't. Mark Lyle's hand pulled back from the breaker box like a kid from a cookie jar. I let a laugh out that had more rust than humor. Old gear always fails, I said into the dead mic, especially when a liar's nearby. USB 2 slid home. I clipped on the backup battery pack Bear insisted on, flipped the switch, and felt the box hum in my hands. A pop, a breath, and then the cone found its voice, static. Then Linda's voice clean as a blade. 2.4 when the developer closes, Mexico after. A beat. Mark steady. If he gets in the way, the policy handles it. The square went still. No shoe scuffs, no coughs. Even the wind felt like it stepped back to listen. I let the file play to the ugly part, the one where my death was a line item, and then I stopped it cold. The silence that followed didn't feel like failure anymore. It felt like thinking. Sharon pressed her folder tighter. David looked at his shoes like they might apologize on his behalf. Reverend's mouth worked once and stopped. Sheriff Holloway shifted off his cruiser and stood up straight. Linda stared at the speaker like it had betrayed her. Maybe it had. Truth's got a mean way of picking sides. "Good morning, Cedar Hollow," I said, finding my name in my throat again. "Let's talk about facts." I reached for the next track. The town leaned in. Linda pushed through the crowd, a sheet of paper lifted like a cross against a storm. "He's sick," she shouted. "He's being evaluated for dementia today if I have to make the call." Hands shook, tears right on time. "None of this is real. He's confused." I didn't argue. I let the paper hang there long enough for every neighbor to read the letterhead. Then I pressed play. Her voice came down like hail on tin. "He won't check email. He doesn't even know how." A laugh, hers, bright and cruel, bounced off the brick. "We'll change the beneficiary once he signs. He signs anything." A ripple moved through the square. The folks who'd brought their pity put it back in their pockets. Reverend Stevens took a step forward, then stalled, a man whose sermon just got rewritten. Sheriff narrowed his eyes, the way a man does when he starts measuring room for handcuffs. Mark leaned, just a touch, like he wanted to be small. I didn't lift my voice. Didn't need to. "You can wave paper," I said. "I brought tape." I nodded at Sharon. She flinched, then straightened. David Rourke swallowed a career's worth of pride. "Keep listening," I said, thumb over the button. "We're just getting to the part where numbers talk." Evan rolled the first poster board into the open. 47 calls in ink big enough to read from the hardware store. The crowd shifted closer, as if they could feel the ground under them choosing a side. I pressed play again. I held up the first board and let Evan take the second. Black ink on white foam, big as barn doors. Dates, times, durations. Same number over and over until the pattern turned into a bruise you couldn't ignore. 47 calls. December 20th through mid-January. Morning, lunch, midnight. All roads pointing to one phone and one man. "Look close," I said, not shouting. "You'll see more truth here than in any rumor." Evan tilted the second board so the back row could read. The wind slid through the square like a blade, but no one moved. I clicked the next track. Linda's voice rang hard in the cold. "Mexico after the sale. We'll change the beneficiary once he signs." A laugh. Mark's voice followed, level as a ledger. "If he balks, the policy covers it." Linda stepped back like the ground tipped under her. Sharon's eyes went glassy, then steady. The Reverend swallowed whatever sermon he'd brought. Sheriff Holloway squared his shoulders as if the law itself had just cleared its throat. "Paper," I said, tapping the board. "Meets tape." The crowd leaned toward the math, because numbers don't blink and audio doesn't blush. A woman from the choir covered her mouth. Bill from the hardware store shook his head like a bolt he trusted just sheared. I let the silence hold until it did the work for me. The wind cut once more, thin and mean. I reached into my coat for the next piece, the one meant to end the argument. That's when the air changed. My fingers found the sleeve where the deed should be and closed on paper too light. I pulled it free and saw gray where there should have been brown, blur where there should have been ink with a spine, a photocopy, cheap, wrong. My stomach went cold first, then my neck, the chill running like a fuse. I checked the other pocket. Nothing. The platform felt smaller by half. Down below, faces turned up like sunflowers gone to frost. Linda's eyes caught mine for just a second, flat, bright, satisfied, then smoothed over like ice on a puddle. Mark shifted his weight, hands buried deep in that expensive coat. I gripped the rail until the knurling bit my palm. Breath in, breath out. Think. The original had slept in a clear sleeve, sealed. I'd checked it twice at the table, once more before I left. Somewhere between kitchen and ladder, hands I trusted, or hands I should have, had been faster than mine. The crowd began to stir, the way a herd does when something smells wrong. A couple of men who'd believed me 5 minutes ago went soft around the eyes. Paper talks. Paper also disappears. Doubt slips back quick if you give it a crack. "Show it," someone called. "Let's see the real deed." I stared at the copy, thin as a lie held to light. The wind shoved the platform. The speaker wire hummed. I lifted my head and scanned the square, every face, every coat, every empty hand. I needed the deed. My pocket held a ghost. A voice cut the murmur clean. "Frank!" Mary's arm rose out of the crowd, a manila envelope high over gray heads. "Grace didn't leave anything at one copy." Air came back into my chest all at once. Bear waved Dale forward. He muscled a short service ladder to the base, steadied it while Mary climbed 2 rungs, just enough to meet Evan halfway. He took the envelope and climbed toward me, careful and fast. The platform shivered under his last step. He handed it over like a medic passing blood. I slid out the sleeve. Certified copy stamped bold. Not a ghost. A spine. The ink looked like it had a backbone again. My father's hand, the chain to mine, 1949, breathing like a coal that never went out. Linda's face went flat. Mark watched the transfer like a gambler watching the wrong card fall. The crowd hushed to hear paper move. "Grace always prepared the ground," Mary called up, voice steady. I thought of the lockbox, the photos, the way she'd said 11 sharp like a vow. Foreshadow wasn't a trick, it was love with a plan. I held the deed up. "This is mine," I said, not to brag, just to anchor the next minute. And it always was. Sheriff's radio crackled at his shoulder. He looked up at me, then at the clock over the feed store, his jaw set. 10 minutes, he said. Then we clear the square. The wind turned cold again. I slid the deed into my inside pocket and reached for the mic. If time was short, truth would have to sprint. My watch ticked over to 9:59, loud as a hammer in my head. Sheriff held up 2 fingers, 10, then a chopping motion. Clear it or kill it. I breathed, found the button, and let Evidence 03 bite. Mark's voice hit first. Calm, practiced, mean. If he's got the deed, we call a wellness check. Get him evaluated. Paper him. Old men spook easy. A rustle moved through the crowd the way wind moves wheat. One way, all at once. Folks know what a wellness check can do in a town where cousins wear badges. Linda stood very still, eyes pinned to the speaker like she could will it silent. The tape went on. "Move it up," she whispered on the recording. "He gave something to Evan. He said Canada." "We don't wait for spring," Mark answered. "Sell the land. If he balks, policy covers it." Policy. Coverage. Words that mean money where a man's pulse should be. Somebody near the hardware store swore under their breath. Sharon's hands shook, then stilled. Reverend Stevens took off his hat. I let the last line hang, then cut the track dead. The silence wasn't empty now. It had weight. It had a target. 7 minutes, Sheriff called. I leaned into the mic. "You've heard their plan to sell my life out from under me. You've heard their plan to take my mind if they couldn't take my name." Evan rolled the call logs closer. Bear nodded toward Linda's phone like a man sighting a fuse. "If you still need clarity," I said, "we can get it straight from the source." I reached into my coat for the next move and felt the whole town lean forward. Bear gave me one quick nod and moved like he'd rehearsed it in another life. He lifted Linda's phone. She hadn't noticed it slip from her coat when the crowd compressed, and tapped what he needed. He held up 2 fingers to me, then 1. The speaker cracked once, then settled into a soft, open line. "Baby, breathe," Mark said, smooth as a salesman. "We're fine." Linda went pale like frost on a windshield. Sheriff Holloway straightened, pulled a notepad from his breast pocket, pen ready. I didn't say a word. You don't talk when a man's digging his own hole. "Did he show the deed?" Mark asked. "If he did, we push the wellness check now. He'll fold. He always folds when people look at him like that." Linda swallowed, voice small. He's got copies." "Copies don't matter. You get me a signature, or we ride the policy. 2.4 once the developer closes, 500 if the old man's heart does us a favor. We're almost there." Almost there. He said it like the finish line belonged to him. The square didn't cough, didn't shuffle, didn't breathe wrong. People stared up as if the words were written on the sky. I watched Sheriff write policy and underline it twice. Bear lifted the phone so the mic could drink every last syllable. Mark went on. "Keep him calm, baby. Old men spook easy." I let the lines sit in the cold a beat longer, then nodded to Bear. He ended the call. The silence came back heavy, not empty. I finally spoke. "Now you know how they say my name when I'm not in the room." Sharon Lee stepped out of the crowd like a girl stepping onto ice she trusts. She was young, but her spine didn't shake. "I need to say something," she called. I tipped the mic toward her. "I worked the teller window at First County. In November, Linda stood at my counter and practiced Frank's signature 3 times. Then she went to the loan officer." David Rourke's face pulled tight, the color of sparrows. He lifted a hand like he was volunteering for blame. "She filed a refinance that same day," he said, voice rough. "Sharon reported it. I didn't escalate. That's on me." He didn't look at Linda. He looked at the people who trust his desk. I slid a laminated sheet from my coat, an old signature card from 68 Grace kept in the lockbox. I held it next to the refinance copy, close enough for the front row to see, slow enough for the back to catch up. "My R hooks and then stands," I said. "This one loops like it learns cursive on the fly. My Y drops, but it doesn't hit the basement. This one drills for water." Heads nodded, mouths tightened. Bill from the hardware store exhaled through his nose like a man who hates being wrong. Reverend Stevens bowed his head for 1 second, then lifted it, eyes clear. Sheriff wrote "forgery indicators" and boxed it. Linda stared at the papers like they were strangers who knew her secrets. Mark kept very still, as if stillness could turn a man into fog. "Paper," I said. "People. Tape. All 3 line up." The wind slid through Main Street, and for the first time all morning, it didn't cut me. It cut them. Mark broke stillness like a bad idea breaking a promise. He lunged for the ladder, boots scraping metal. I heard Bear shout, but the wind took the words. Mark climbed fast, eyes on the platform, on the USB that had just carved his name into the morning. 2 rungs, 4, 6. The 8th rung wore a skin of old ice. His foot hit it and went out from under him. His body slammed the ladder, my platform lurched, and the rail bit my ribs. For a heartbeat, I saw sky where ground should be. My boots skated on grit. The speaker wire sang a high, scared note. I grabbed the rail with both hands and felt cold through glove and bone. "Dad!" Evan's voice cut the distance. He was there, arms around the ladder's side rails, bracing the whole thing with his back and legs like he'd decided steel was nothing but another stubborn thing a man could hold. The sway stopped. My knees found themselves again. I swallowed the taste of iron and air. Mark tried to climb again. Sheriff Holloway hit the bottom rung first, one hand on the man's belt, the other on a wrist, turning weight and momentum into cuffs. Click. Right hand. Click. Left. The coat didn't look expensive anymore. It looked tight. I looked down at Evan. He looked up at me. No words, just the truth of it. We'd both been falling for months. Today we finally caught something that mattered. Bear lifted a folder like a man raising a flag. "Policy language," he called, calm as if we were in a living room instead of a storm. "Change of beneficiary requires a wet signature and 2 witnesses. Notaries alone don't count on this rider." He read the lines slow, each one built to hold weight. You could feel the crowd lean into the clarity, law that didn't care about gossip. I pulled a printout from my coat. Church camera stills Mary had helped me pull. Timestamp burned in the corner. The exact afternoon Linda swore I'd signed. There I was in the fellowship hall, shaking the pastor's hand, cookie in my other. Same hour, same day, no pen, no desk, no signature. I slid the photo along the rail so the front row could see, then held it up for the back. "Alibi," I said, voice steady. "You can forge a name. You can't forge where a man's boots were standing." Linda opened her mouth, then shut it. The paper in her hand sagged. Whatever story she wanted to tell had run out of room. Sheriff took the policy copy from Bear, the photo from me, and the air changed again, this time in a way that made the square feel honest. He nodded once, wrote 2 words on his pad, fraud elements, boxed them, and looked at Linda like a man measuring a doorway. I found her eyes. She tried to look past me. I didn't let her. "This ends," I said, "right now." I lifted the deed so the morning could see it. Paper browned at the edges, ink steady as fence posts. "My father signed this to his son," I said. "Not Jack Miller, Frank Bennett." The name felt like a weight I'd carried since I knew what a shovel was. "This whole life sits on this page," I said. "You can fake a signature. You can't fake blood." I let the words hang where everyone could count them. No sermon, no speech. Just the thing itself, held up against the same sky we all live under. Somewhere a door closed. A truck coughed and thought better of it. I set the mic on the rail so soft it didn't even click. The cone went quiet. The wind took what was left and pushed it down Main like a broom through a shop floor. People breathed again, the way they do when a doctor says the word benign. I felt it too, weight leaving my chest. Mark stared at the concrete like it might open up and save him. Linda's face went blank as a new check. I slid the deed into my coat, right over ribs that never learned to quit. My hands were steady, my boots were sure. "This land stays," I said, loud enough for the back row. "I do too." Then I turned toward the ladder, ready to feel ground again. Sheriff Holloway broke the spell with words meant for bad mornings. He took Mark by the wrist, read the rights, and clicked the cuffs like a mechanic seating a socket. The coat didn't look rich anymore. It looked borrowed. Mark kept his mouth shut for once. The crowd parted because it knows how to make a lane when the law walks. Linda made the other choice. She ran. Gravel sprayed, tires fishtailed. The car slid past the feed store before catching. She didn't look back. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to look at that would forgive her. I swung onto the ladder and felt the shake in my legs the way you feel a storm after it's gone by. Evan was there, hands on the rails, body braced like he could carry both of us if the steel forgot its job. Step by step, the rungs got wider, the air warmer, the noise of Maine turning back into town instead of trial. Boots on dirt, knees soft. Evan's hand on my shoulder, firm as truth. I let out a breath that sounded older than me. "We're good," I said. "We're good," he answered, and didn't take his hand away. Dale came first, then Reverend, then faces I'd known since trucks had square fenders. Apologies moved like weather, quiet, real. I nodded, not to be gracious, just because standing was enough for now. The square emptied by inches. The silo threw a long shadow like a flag that didn't need a pole. I looked at it once, then turned toward home. The worst was over. Now came the part where I learned how to live with it. They came in ones and twos, hats in hand, the way men come to fix a fence they let sag too long. Dale first, eyes wet, he'd never admit. "We believe the talk," he said. I shook his hand. He squeezed too hard like the grip itself could carry weight off me. Bill from the hardware store looked at his boots. Should have known better. I told him we all should have and let him off the hook I wasn't holding. Reverend Stevens stood there a second, working through words like a man untangling line. "We owe you an apology," he said finally. "All of us." He offered his hand. I took it. No sermon, no verses, just skin and bone and a promise to do better with the next story that tries to own this town. Sharon stepped close with a nod that said more than any speech. David Rourke met my eye and didn't look away. "We'll make it right," he said, and for once I believed a banker because paper was already bending to the truth. Apologies drifted across Maine like a front moving through, quiet, steady, soaking in. You could feel something ease up inside the square, like a muscle unclenching. The silo threw a long shadow that didn't look like judgment anymore. It looked like shelter. Evan kept a hand on my shoulder, light, as if to remind me I wasn't holding this alone. I wasn't. Not today. We didn't celebrate. We just stood there until the cold said move. My name had its shape back. That was enough. 2 weeks after the square, a thick envelope showed up with an Iowa postmark and a tone you could hear without opening it. I set it on the table, poured coffee, and signed where the stickers told me to sign. I didn't read the rest. There's mercy in not letting poison explain itself. That afternoon, Linda came once, dust on the rocker panels in a kind of hurry that happens after a door closes behind you. She stood by the hood, face raw from crying, or wanting to be seen crying. "Frank, please," she said. It was Mark. I shook my head. "Don't put your name in his mouth, and don't put his in yours. You chose it." The words weren't loud, but they didn't wobble. Silence tried to turn the yard into a church. Wind tugged at the yard flag, the rope ticking the pole like a clock. She looked past me at the house as if the rooms might remember her differently than I did. They wouldn't. "There's nowhere to go," she said. "There's forward," I answered. She waited for a softer door than the one I gave her. I didn't have it. She got back in the car. The door shut with a hollow thud that felt like an empty drum, noise with nothing inside. Gravel popped under her tires. The sound faded down the section road and was gone. I gathered the envelope and slid it into a drawer with other finished things. Old warranties, paid notes, maps with routes we don't run anymore. Some messes you clean, some you close. This one was closed. Evan quit the road without a speech. He showed up before sunup with 2 duffels and a look that said he was done hauling other people's freight. We put coffee in travel mugs and fired the tractors. 2 engines waking up together. 2 lines laid straight across ground that never asked for more than that. We ran side by side, iron humming through our boots. The air smelled like wet dirt and diesel, a church I still believed in. I showed him how to hear a bearing before it screams, how a smooth idle lies and a rough one tells the truth. He showed me how to log moisture and yield on a screen that maps the field like a living thing, how one pass can teach the next. We didn't talk about Linda. We talked about row spacing, seed depth, the rain that was late and the rain that would come. His hand on the throttle matched mine on the wheel, and the rows came out clean as stitches. At lunch, we ate on the tailgate, mud on our boots, sun finally warm. He pulled up yield graphs on his phone. I showed him where the soil turns mean on the south corner. Old knowledge, new tools, same field. In the afternoon, green nicks broke the crust. First shoots. He smiled without looking at me, and I let him keep that moment. "Mary's coming Sunday," I said, packing the thermos. "Bringing Grace's albums." He nodded. "Good," he said. "Some things you don't store in the cloud." Mary came with a casserole and a box that used to smell like cedar. We set the album on the kitchen table and turned pages like moving hay bales. Slow, careful, two hands. Grace on the courthouse steps, veil crooked, eyes sure. Me with a haircut I don't claim anymore, tie too tight, grin like a man who just touched daylight. My father with his hat low, palm on a bin wall we poured when cement felt like wealth. Grace kept what mattered, Mary said. It wasn't a line, it was a measurement. I touched the edge of a photo with a finger still stained from diesel and dirt. Not smudging, just saying hello. First harvest. Grain dust hanging in sunbeams like proof you could breathe your work and live. The old farmhouse in paint so white it made clouds look lazy. Grace in a field of wheat up to her waist, hand out, not picking, just counting time. "She's still watching your back," Mary added. I nodded and looked past the window at the field, turning the slow color of a promise. The lockbox, the deed, the way she'd planned for my blind spots like she loved even the parts of me that made trouble. We closed the album and sat without speaking. The room carried a weight that didn't hurt. Evan came in, saw the box, and sat too. 3 chairs, 1 table, 4 lives on paper. "Thank you," I said. Mary patted the cover. "Thank her," she said. I did, without words. Late light laid itself over the field, that kind of easy gold you only get after hard weather. Wind combed the wheat and made a sound like a secret you can finally keep. Evan and I stood at the fence, elbows on old wood smoothed by years of our family leaning the same way. "Land doesn't betray you," I said. "People do," he answered. "Not hard, just honest." We both smiled a little, the kind that fits a man's face better after he's been wrong and lived through it. The silo cut the sky like a blunt knife. A flock of blackbirds stitched across it, a fast, dark ribbon that unrolled and vanished toward the river. I told him how his granddad read weather by smell, how he taught me to plant when the soil held heat in the fist of your palm. He told me where the sensors said the low spot dries last. 2 languages, same meaning. Take care of what takes care of you. He picked a green head and rolled it between forefinger and thumb, counting weeks without speaking. I watched his hands, strong, steady, carrying both our names. We weren't making a speech. We were making a promise the way men do it here, with boots on dirt, with nothing fancy, with time. "Tomorrow," he said. We hit the North Strip. "Tomorrow," I said back. The wind ran through the wheat again. It didn't clap. It didn't cheer. It just kept moving, like work done right. I sat on the porch with coffee that forgot how to be warm. The night had that old Nebraska clarity, stars pressing down close enough to count if a man had less history and more patience. The boards under my boots remembered every season I've carried over them. The house breathed slow, the way a house does when it's forgiven for what it held. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. I've learned that the hard way. Forgetting lets rot back in. Forgiveness is locking the door and leaving the light on anyway. It's setting the past in a drawer where it belongs and not letting it climb back into your bed. I thought of Linda's face when the tape talked back. I thought of Grace's steadiness traveling through paper and time like a hand on my shoulder. I thought of Evan asleep down the hall, our tractors cooling in the dark like horses with the reins dropped. I chose it right there, to remember without bleeding, to keep the lesson and let go of the noise. Tomorrow I'll drop another line of seed where the field asks for it. Tomorrow the meter will count and the sky will do what the sky does. I'll listen for the bearing before it screams. I'll trust the rough idle over the smooth. I finished the cold coffee and set the cup down quiet. The night didn't change for me. It never has. But I changed enough for it. Morning's coming. I've got rows to make straight. I started with a piece of plastic under a truck, small, smooth, and mean. From there it was lies stacked like pallets, gaslighting that tried to bend my own voice back at me, greed that put a price tag where a pulse should be. I walked through all of it and climbed a silo in the cold to put truth higher than rumor. I spoke, and the town listened. Paper met tape. Numbers met ears. A plan built on my silence cracked when the speaker found its breath. They tried to take my name off my own life. They tried to make my mind the argument and my death the shortcut. It didn't hold. I kept what matters. The land stayed where my father set it. My name found its shape again. My son came home and stood where I stood. If you're looking for poetry, that's about as close as a man like me gets. You can fake a signature. You can't fake blood. I still hear wind in the wheat and know what it's saying. Keep rows straight, bearings greased, stories honest. Forgiveness isn't amnesia. It's putting the lockbox back on the shelf and leaving it there. Tomorrow there'll be work, and that's a mercy. If you've ever been talked over in your own house, if you've ever had to climb high just to be heard, you know what this cost. If you want to see where this road goes next, how a man rebuilds after the storm, stick with me. I'll show you what staying looks like.